Right now, we do have a few questions that we would like to start answering. And the first question regards to student already asking about their graduation and how can they graduate early?
Well, we're glad you're so enthusiastic about coming to the University of Iowa and about studying hard and taking many, many courses all at once. But we'd also like to encourage you to slow down a little bit and consider all the interesting things you're going to find here. And besides just sort of whipping through the curriculum, we'd like you to do internships. We'd like you to work in the community. We'd like you to volunteer. We'd like you to be really involved in your classroom homework. So think about slowing down as well. In order to graduate in 3 years, you would have to pick a particular major that allowed that. Not all majors do. For example, it'd be very difficult to complete business in 3 years. Mm-hmm. But I think you could probably do theater. Now, are you interested in theater? So it really depends on what you want to study. Additionally, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, we do limit the amount of credit hours a student can take, especially when students are still learning English. You need permission to take additional credit hours. So based on your language skills, you may not be able to take the credit hours you need to graduate in fewer than 4 years.
And I would add, I was an international student as a graduate student, and I understand how expensive it is to study internationally.
It is very expensive.
And I know when I talk to my international students, many of them are concerned about the cost of education, and that the drive to finish in less than 4 years is in part due to that. So I know that concern, I respect that concern, but I also want students to have the fullest experience they can possibly have. And that all the things Kathy mentioned will lead to a fuller experience. And so you have to balance the financial concerns, but also if you're paying so much for something, get what you're paying for as well.
That's right. I think the best way to save money is to be very successful in each year of classes. Mm-hmm. Then you don't have to take the class over. Yep. You don't have to worry about your grades. And that can save a lot of time towards graduation.
And if one of the goals is to improve your English here at the university, having time to do those extracurriculars, to do the things outside of class, can be the spaces where people really grow dramatically, not only in their sort of academic English, but in just English in general, get more confident. And so having the time to join clubs and organizations and groups, to experience some of the cultural life outside the university can really benefit those things as well.
That's right. And I think students who know multiple languages, 2 or 3 languages perhaps, and who have a really great command of English, I think those students have really a lot of wonderful career opportunities as well. So practicing your English is very important for your future. For example, if you're interested in business, great to know 3 languages or 4 languages.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hopefully the participants will take heed from what our panelists had to say. But we have another question that is related to adjusting to classwork and coursework and academics in general. So the question is, how can they do it quickly or as quickly as possible after they arrive here? Do you have any insight on that?
Well, I think there are some things that people certainly can do to make the adjustment go smoothly. And one is to seek out people that are unlike yourself. I know we all like to be in a social group where we feel comfortable. But one way to make the transition is really get to know people who might live here, who are from other countries, and really talk to them and share what they're going through. You'll see then you're not alone in all this newness, and that will really help you to realize that even though it's new and it's different, you can still be a leader during the moment of change.
I think also getting very confident with English is probably the best way to transition. And I've studied abroad, I've worked in a second and third language, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to be out there every day feeling like you're behind the conversation, working really, really hard to understand not what someone's saying, but what someone just said. But the sooner you kind of force yourself through that uncomfortable moment, and it might be a week, it might be several weeks, it might be months. When you come out on the other side, your facility with the language is going to be so much better. And you're going to be able to participate in the whole life of the university much more easily. But it is uncomfortable. It's exhausting. I often feel like I have a different personality when I'm in the places where I do my research, because it's so much harder for me to speak, to be part of conversations. I'm more thoughtful, probably, honestly. But that to me, I think, is the biggest way to transition. And so international students, especially international students coming from a country where English isn't your first language, you have that transition, plus all the things that students normally go through when they leave home. But once you're through the other side of that, I feel like that, you'll really have a chance to experience what the university has to offer.
So you're sort of saying, don't let someone else do all your English speaking for you. Get right out there and start talking, even if it's not perfect. It's okay.
Yeah. Yes. No. Yeah. Like, take a chance. I taught a class 2 winters ago for largely for international students. It was over winter break. I realized from talking to many of our international students that they're here on campus with little to do. And so it was a class where I think there were 16 students in it, and 12 of them were international and 4 were domestic. And every single international student mentioned that they felt they didn't feel very confident in their English. And one of the goals of the class was for students who are leaving their ESL classes but haven't yet really entered their Gen A classes to have a chance in a really safe environment to talk about their experiences, to get to experience Iowa City. And what I learned from that was most students were much more proficient with their English than they were giving themselves credit for. And that you just kind of have to be bold.
Right.
You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to maybe not say things quite correctly. And the more you're willing to make those, and I know this because I struggle with it. Like, I want to be right. I want to say things correctly. And so when I'm working in a different language, it's very hard to put yourself out there. But the more you do, the more gratifying the experience will be. And the more likely it is you'll realize that, no, I'm doing this. I'm actually doing this.
Right. Thank you so much. That's very insightful.
There's one more thing I want to say
Yeah.
too, where don't feel guilty too if at the end of the day you find someone who speaks the language, your first language, and you're having a conversation with them as well. Like, that's a very comforting thing. And it's nice to be able to not have to think so hard about everything you say. We have to balance that with taking the risk and being bold as well.
I absolutely agree. And those are very, very good insights and advice in general for all international students. The next question, actually, there are a couple of questions that are related to the topic of a major. So first of all, student is asking whether they can have more than one major. And then if they don't have a major yet, then what courses should they be taking?
Those are great questions. Students can have more than one major, certainly. It's good to know how they work together in some ways, but you can certainly talk to your advisor about the requirements for a number of majors, 2 or 3, and then choose the one first that you think you will like best and go from there.
Well, for students who haven't declared a major yet, that can be kind of a tense time, but it's also a really fruitful time, because the university and the academic advisors center where I work, we've developed a number of programs, events, techniques to help students really explore their interests. So as an advisor, I take a values approach with students who are sort of at a loss for what to do, what they're interested in, or what major might fit. We talk about what's important to you. Like, what sorts of things do you think are most important in your life? What things do you want to see in your life? And that can sometimes lead to a direction in terms of major. Or maybe you might start with a career. Like, there's a career you're interested in. We have a career center here that is excellent, and they can help you develop a context for understanding what your interests are, how that might influence a career, and what major might help you get to the path you want to be in. And then you bring that information back to your advisor, and they can help you select courses.
Don't you think that sometimes students get a little too worried about the major? Because actually,
Definitely,
most majors are teach you some fundamental thinking, writing, speaking skills, transferable skills, so that you have many opportunities, whether you're a history major. I mean, a lot of our English majors go in business, for example. And some of our artists also become business people. So, and then we have the other way around too, right? People who are in business decide to become historians.
Most definitely. Like I think the important thing is finding the topic or the approach that you find personally resonant, that really means something to you. Because then you'll develop critical thinking, writing, speaking skills that will work for almost anything post-graduation, like in terms of a career or even just an approach to life, an approach to being a person in the world.
Okay. Thank you very much. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. But we have a few more questions here. And one is from a transfer student. And so how do they know what classes they had before meeting the general education requirements? What kind of classes they still need to take in order to meet those requirements? So how can you help them to figure it out?
Well, I think transfer students in some ways come in with a great base of knowledge because they've been to an institution already and they know a little bit of what to expect. So that's really wonderful to come into the University of Iowa that way. It's important that you get your official record from your previous school sent to the University of Iowa as soon as possible. As soon as it's sent and received, it will be reviewed, and the people who review it will know which courses you've had done that will apply to our graduation requirements. So it will be all decided then, hopefully, by the time you get here, as long as you get that record sent in early. And the requirements that you do have fulfilled will show up in what we call your degree audit, which is really your roadmap to graduation. It shows how far you've come, how many miles you have left to go, and so all your coursework will appear on that, and you will know exactly what's done and what still needs to be done. And then your advisor and you will have a conversation about that roadmap so you can fill in the pieces.
Yeah, one of the very first things we do with any incoming student that we see at the Advising Center is to look at a degree audit and determine, what does this document do? How do I understand the requirements and what I've done? And so if your transcript is in, if it's been evaluated by admissions, those courses will show up on your degree audit. And if you're not understanding it right now, trust me, by the time you get through orientation, your advisor will help you understand how to read that document. And the sooner you gain confidence with the document, the sooner it is you'll have agency over what you need to do, where you need to go, like the sorts of classes you might want to take still. It's not the easiest document to work with, but once you sort it out, it really helps.
Yeah. That's actually very, very good advice, and addition to what you have mentioned earlier about the degree audit. So that's great. Thank you. Since we're talking about majors, there's a quick question here about what if a student is interested in an actual science?
Actuarial science.
Yes. Can they start studying it now, or when can they declare that major?
Well, we do have a very good program in actuarial science. And a lot of students start in that by taking some of the entry-level courses, the stats courses, for example. It is a major that you need to be accepted into based on your GPA. It's quite competitive, if I remember correctly.
It is competitive.
Do you work with those students at all?
Our office works with actuarial science interests.
Yeah.
So these are students who declare that they want to be admitted to the program. They have yet to complete the coursework required for the program. And so you would have an advisor in our office who's going to work with you on the courses that you need to take and the sorts of grades that you probably need to have in those courses to be a successful applicant. So the things you'll be doing will be, Calc 1, Calc 2, linear algebra, math, stats, these sorts of courses. And you need to do very well in all of them to be a competitive applicant for the program.
And once you're admitted, the department does help you prepare for your exams
Yes.
and to be certified. And students who are in that program are very successful.
Yes.
It's really great program. And speaking of majors, students who are in that major often are also math majors or majors in statistics, because it is possible. Those fields really do speak to each other. So we do see a lot of students doing what we call a double major.
Double major.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's really common.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. I think that was very, very exhausting and comprehensive answer actually for these students, hopefully. It sounds like it's a very popular major or area of study.
I would guess if you're interested in actual science and you've declared that interest, you'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with an advisor at orientation. And that conversation will be ongoing. Like you'll be able to clarify any requirements. You can schedule appointments with your advisor to talk about it more. Like there'll be a lot of support surrounding something like that.
Right, that's correct, and thank you for adding that. Yep, that's definitely the pattern. I do have a quick question here, whether Tutor Iowa is free. Is tutoring free?
Tutor Iowa is not free. Tutor Iowa is really a database of other students, both graduate and undergraduate, who've been qualified and vetted to do tutoring. And those students do charge money. It's not as much as you might find in other places. So it's really a way to find a tutor that's responsible and good and will help you, but there's a small charge.
There's also Tutor Iowa will list, so for instance, it asks you to, when you search for help on Tutor Iowa, it asks you to input the course that you're searching for. For instance, Principles of Chemistry, the first chemistry course for chemistry majors. You type that in and it'll show you, just like Kathy said, students who are willing to offer tutoring. But it will also show you the free resources on campus that aren't necessarily tutoring, but function like tutoring. So for instance, supplemental instruction, the chemistry fraternity on campus, the chemistry lab, the chem center, these will all show up along with the students who are offering tutoring services. So you can find, like, it's a great place to go to look for, like, what help does campus offer for a particular class. Almost any help that is offered will be listed on Tutor Iowa.
Right.
So really the tutoring is just part of that offering on the specific subject.
For a tutor by the hour you will pay, but there are these other resources, and supplemental instruction, which is sort of peer tutoring, is free as well. So.
But usually there's a variety of options that you have access to that you'll have to kind of determine, what do I need most? What kind of help do I need most? And then you look for the Tutor Iowa website, and it'll tell you, here are your options. And you can talk to an advisor, you can talk to a TA, a teaching assistant, or an instructor to help determine, like, where you're at and maybe where you need to go.
Excellent. Sometimes I learn something new. And we have a couple more questions, and I would like to still encourage our participants to ask through Q&A function of the Zoom application to send us a question, and if they have any more questions. We still have a little bit more time left, but let's answer these questions, and they sort of are about the high GPA. But one question asks, how can a student get a high GPA? While the other question is whether high GPA kind of guarantees them some kind of a scholarship if they reach a high GPA. So which one would you like to answer first? How to get how to achieve a high GPA, perhaps?
Sure, let's start with that. I think when I've worked with students, there'll be some students who come and say, this is the hardest class I've ever taken. I'm getting all Fs. Oh, the teacher is so unclear. And then another student will come in who's getting an A, and I say, what are you doing? What's different? Why are you getting an A and that other person I talked to who's getting, the last 5 people are all getting Ds? Well, that student will describe studying every day so that memorization and recall is a normal part of that person's life. So studying not all at once, but over a long period of time, so that you're practicing using that information, you're practicing learning, saying that information to yourself, you're discovering what you're confused about, and you're learning that, so that when you get to an exam, you really can recall and apply what you've learned. So it's not about brilliance. It's not about being smart enough. It's about being patient, understanding that learning takes time. It's like a sport, or like practicing a musical instrument. Every day you practice. Practice with friends, practice alone, practice with tutors. But that's how you learn. That's how you become an A student.
The only thing I would add is I often talk to students and encourage them to not have the first time that they're examined on information be the actual exam. So one way to study really well is to make an everyday practice, but also to test yourself, to give yourself the opportunity to be wrong, or to not answer a question correctly, because there's a comfort in rereading your notes over and over and over again and feeling like, now I've got it. But one of the things that the university in general asks students to do is to apply information, right? So you might have the information memorized in a certain context, but the instructor is going to ask you to apply that information in a different context. And so giving yourself the opportunity to either answer problem or sample problems, or to test yourself, or quiz yourself, or have others quiz you. That's often a very important part of the whole study process. And it helps you go from knowing the information and mastering the information to applying the information. And that's the big step.
That's very, very true. And it also helps you see what you know and don't know, so you become more confident.
Yeah, definitely.
So what about the other question?
Oh, about
if
scholarships.
students qualify for scholarship if they reach high GPA?
Scholarships are all different. There are some that are just based on high GPA, but sometimes they're also based on a student being involved in the community, being a leader on campus, being in great need. So there's a range of types of scholarships, and they each tend to have different requirements. For example, you might have to take a certain number of courses. You might have to get, besides the GPA, you might have to do something else as well.
And if you've been following the webinar series so far, there was a webinar, right, on MyUI. Yes. So there is a link on the homepage of MyUI to the scholarship portal. And so that can be a great space if you have questions about, do scholarships require me to be an international student, a domestic student? Are grades a factor? Is need a factor? The scholarship portal can answer a lot of those questions. So tooling around on that, spending some time looking there can be a good use of your time.
That's a great idea. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very good points about that. And so thank you for all the questions today. And this was actually our last question for today. But before you leave, please help us complete a survey, a very brief webinar survey that would help us understand if the webinars are helpful, to what extent, and whether we need to do any improvements to make them even better than they are. We believe they are excellent and they can help you a lot with your preparations, but then there's always room for improvement. So let's do some review of the dates, important dates. Again, we would like you to be here in Iowa City on the university campus by January 6th, because the mandatory international student orientation starts on January 7th. And we would like to make sure that the orientation is most helpful to you in transitioning from wherever you come from, either academically or personally or geographically, to the life here at the university and Iowa City. And then finally, except for completing the survey for today's webinar, other reminders are regarding the fact that we are recording each of the webinars, and the recordings are available on our website, which is shown here on the slide. And then in addition to the webinar recordings, you have other resources available to you for the pre-arrival preparation. And again, the website link is provided here on the slide to the webpage for new students, where you can find a lot of information. And I would like to also add that if you have any very specific questions regarding your pre-arrival, having any issues getting prepared, or during your planning for the travel here, please don't hesitate to contact our orientation team at isss-orientation@uiowa.edu, and one of our team members will be happy to follow up with you. Well, that is it for our webinar series for you, and we look forward to meeting you at the orientation in January.